I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, what's up, world? Welcome back again to I Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. I mixwhatilike.org for all of this and more, and all kinds of good work, and a whole bunch of warehoused audio and visual and written materials covering the breadth of the Africana experience, world, radical thought, left politics, all kinds of good stuff. And at I Mix What I Like for all your relevant social media. Of course, before we move on to anything, a couple of things. Please, of course, go to the Freedom Archives, freedomarchives.org, and sign up, and among many other things, sign up for the Political Prisoner newsletter. Please check the latest on Rochelle Cinquay McGee that we talked about in the previous video, but I just want to keep encouraging that people be in contact with the history and current condition of political prisoners. Mumia Abu-Jamal, of course, please see the video we just did with Lynn Washington and Dr. Burroughs, and just in general. And of course, the National Jericho Movement, same thing. Please go to their website as well. Please also share, like, retweet, comment, get in the chat with your questions, comments, critiques, etc. We'll try to get to at least some of them at some point over the next hour or so with our very special guest to talk about something that I want to sort of set up initially by making reference to the latest statement, or a new statement that has come out on behalf of several Black Lives Matter chapters that is regarding a statement that they are saying is a statement from the front lines of Black Lives Matter. It's time for accountability. And I won't read the whole thing. We put the link in the YouTube comment or description section. We'll put the link, of course, in the post at imixwhatilike.org. So please check it out in full. But just simply put, it was recently declared that Patrisse Cullors was appointed the executive director to the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Since then, 2 new Black Lives Matter formations have been announced to the public: a Black Lives Matter Political Action Committee and Black Lives Matter Grassroots. Black Lives Matter Grassroots was allegedly created to support the organizational needs of chapters separate from the financial functions of BLMGN. We, the undersigned chapters, believe that all of these events occurred without democracy and assert that it was without the knowledge of the majority of Black Lives Matter chapters across the country and world. They go on to lay out the rest of their claims and their arguments and their concerns, all of which have to do mostly with the issues of accountability among the leadership, distribution of funding, and a disconnect, more or less, between the grassroots chapters themselves and leadership of Black Lives Matter. For those who have been at all covering this, or interested in this, or in contact with members of Black Lives Matter efforts around the country, this has long been understood to be something that has been bubbling, a lot of concerns about these kinds of questions. And a couple of years ago, as all of this was just sort of bubbling, at least in my small universe, I invited our next guest to have a conversation about his concerns about the way identity is being used as an organizing tool politically, and in particular, the way it was being used around Black Lives Matter. So we wanted to talk with him then, and of course, want to talk with him again now to see what he thinks, given these most recent updates. And of course, that person is now, I didn't even realize how late I was to this, over a year late to this, the newly retired Professor Adolph Leonard Reed Jr., who used to be, or was formerly in his professional life, an American Marxist professor emeritus of political science, last at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in studies of issues of race and U.S. politics. He has taught at Yale, Northwestern, the New School for Social Research, and has written on racial and economic inequality. And I will also just add that I was first introduced to him when encouraged to do so by the founding director of the Africana Studies and Research Center at Cornell University, the great Dr. James Turner. And ever since then, I've been trying to stay in touch with Professor Reed's work, and appreciate you once again joining me and us. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Once again, brother, good afternoon. And thank you for asking me. It's my pleasure. It always is. We always have very good and enlightening discussions. So.
Yeah, and there's not enough of them, so I'm looking forward to this one as well. I would like to, if I can, I want to pull up very quickly the first paragraph of what you had written, excuse me, a couple of years ago as sort of a reminder, and the link to which I've also put below in the YouTube part, and we'll put, of course, at imixwhatilike.org. Just very quickly, reading here, you start this piece by saying, some readers will know that I've contended that, despite its proponents' assertions, anti-racism is not a different sort of egalitarian alternative to a class politics, but is a class politics itself. The politics of a strain of the professional managerial class whose worldview and material interests are rooted within a political economy of race and ascriptive identity group relations. Moreover, although it often comes with a garnish of disparaging but empty references to neoliberalism as a generic sign of bad things, anti-racist politics is in fact the left wing of neoliberalism, in that its sole metric of social justice is opposition to disparity in the distribution of goods and bads in the society, an ideal that naturalizes the outcomes of capitalist market forces so long as they are equitable along racial and other identitarian lines. As I and my colleague Walter Ben Michaels have insisted repeatedly over the last decade, the burden of that ideal social justice is that the society would be fair if 1% of the population controlled 90% of the resources, so long as the dominant 1% were 13% Black, 17% Latino, 50% female, 4% or whatever LGBTQ, etc. That is the neoliberal gospel of economic justice, articulated more than a half century ago by Chicago neoclassical economist Gary Becker as non-discriminatory markets that reward individual quote-unquote human capital without regard to race or other invidious distinctions, end quote. So I'll just start there and ask you to respond to what you've heard in the latest news that I know you've been paying attention to regarding Black Lives Matter and related, generally your related concerns.
Right. Okay. Well, I can't speak much to the internal dynamics of the Black Lives Matter sector at this point, right? Because I don't know. And like, there's always an internal story that goes beyond what's put out to public consumption, and I don't really know what the lines of cleavage are and what they're about. What I can say though is I guess a couple of things. One of them is that most immediately, I guess, since the summer, we've seen a flood of corporate money going into support of Black causes, Black Lives Matter apparently being among them, or multiple ships that sail under the flag of Black Lives Matter being among them. And this was initially projected as a response to the travesty of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other such events. It made you wonder though, because a lot of the people ponying up this money were people like Jeff Bezos, and I doubt that Elon Musk put up any of the money, but like Uber, Walmart, and other operations. But I think even Tyson's Chicken put up some money.
They did.
And within by the middle of June, right, the total had already hit, I think, $1.8 billion. And, some of the money was going to anti-police brutality and criminal justice reform efforts. Some of the money was going to organizations like the NAACP, I think, and others. But you have to ask, well, what does it mean that the corporate sector, and especially in this case, corporations that are sort of known for exploitation of low-wage workers, right? And particular of exploitation of low-wage workers who are disproportionately Black or non-white. What's the the notion of a moral compass or of conscience that leads them to get upset and outraged in this one domain, but not in the other. And the related question is, what should those of us who understand ourselves to be, fighting for a more just society take away from the efforts that they not only offered the money, but that people took it, right? Because the taking it is as much as the offering. And on that latter point, I'm old enough that I can remember this from Black Power and from the war on poverty and Black capitalism, and even people going to work for corporations, saying that, well, very earnestly and genuinely and sincerely saying, well, I'm going to work for IBM to rip off the man. I'm taking this Ford Foundation money to rip off the man. Yeah, I worked in a Ford-funded program and myself for 2 years before I went to graduate school. And then in graduate school, I was in a Ford Foundation fellowship. I don't think it worked. I hope it didn't work out the way they hoped it would. But anyway, so there's that. But the earlier question was, and it's a deeper and broader one, and it's not just a Black Lives Matter thing. It's not even just a Black thing. But that one of the things that's happened over the last 30 years or thereabouts is that the idea of a social movement, and especially a political movement, became disconnected from the requirement of having a mobilizable base, right, a constituent base. And by constituents, I don't mean speaking for the Black community, because people have been doing that for as long as I've been alive, as long as my father was alive, as long as my grandfather was alive, since Booker T. Washington, basically. But a constituency of people, of actual people who have names and addresses and ways you can get in touch with them, ways that they can be polled with respect to whether or not they accept or repudiate statements and actions taken in their name by people who purport to be leaders. And I'm not really here to cast aspersions at any individuals, because what's happened is that after a couple of generations of this disconnection that I mentioned, people don't even think it's necessary anymore, right? Or that the idea that when you claim to be speaking for somebody, right, speaking for Black youth, say, that you should be able to respond to a simple question like, well, which Black youth exactly are you speaking for, right? And that organizations or grouplets or entities that purport to represent people should have publicly recognized mechanisms through which the people whom they purport to represent can accept or reject what they say, what they do, what their or their very claims to represent them, right? Because otherwise, you're not really talking about a movement, like you're talking about a ventriloquist that turns the putative constituency like into a ventriloquist dummy. And that just leaves itself, right, open to all kinds of, I don't like to talk about corruption because that's ultimately in the eye of the beholder. But to all kinds, but it lends itself easily to conflating, confusing, clouding the distinction between self-advancement and building a movement, right? And it's easy to say that, right? Like it's easy to convince oneself of some version of the doing well by doing good fantasy, that what benefits me is good for the entire population on behalf of whom I purport to speak. And just going back to 2016 for one simple kind of illustration, when Marissa Johnson and her buddy disrupted Bernie Sanders' speech at a Social Security rally with the claim that Social Security wasn't relevant to Black people, right? I was thinking, well, what planet did she just fly in from, right? Because given the patterns of distribution of wealth and income in the society, and especially with the retreat of access to real pensions, right, like over the last 30 years, you could make an argument that Social Security, the Social Security program, is disproportionately pertinent to Black people, right?
Well, one of the arguments I always heard is it related to that issue was along the lines that Black people don't live long enough to get to Social Security and enjoy it long enough. So, so the focus of the fight should be elsewhere. But
well, I
anyway,
tell you, yeah, I've heard that too, and it's interesting that one of the first places that I heard that was in an op-ed back in the early 1980s by James Kilpatrick.
Oh wow!
You're probably part of a very small minority of people your age and younger who've ever heard the name, but this dude was one of the architects of massive resistance against desegregation public education in Virginia, and he didn't have a brain transplant and he didn't have a conversion, because like this was the only time in his life that I'd ever seen him say anything that purported to express concern for Black people. So what does that tell you, right? And it's interesting too in this regard that
well, because it was also part of a broader fight by the right to get rid of Social Security as a quote unquote handout or entitlement. Right.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think that's the way a lot of this stuff works. What works now? Now, I mean, this may sound a tad like a conspiracy theory, but I don't think it is, frankly. But so yeah, I worked in the Sanders campaign both times. And I worked independently of the campaign in South Carolina with the Debs Jones Douglas Institute's Medicare for All South Carolina campaign. And we noticed there, but there was a lot of support among working South Carolinians, the vast majority of them Black working South Carolinians, for the idea of Medicare for All once you explain it to people. And also once people start talking among themselves about how healthcare ought to be a right that everyone should have access to without regard to ability to pay, the conversation naturally also started to drift toward other public goods, right? Like education, housing, right? I mean, so forth and so on. And even in South Carolina, where Biden cleaned Bernie's clock, more than 50% of Democratic voters said that they preferred Medicare for all. Even after James Clyburn, the Black congressman in South Carolina, Kingmaker, when he endorsed Biden at the last minute, said explicitly that as far as he was concerned, the campaign was between Biden and Medicare for all, okay? That capped like more than 20 straight primaries in which no matter how the presidential vote preference turned out, majorities of voters clearly said that they wanted Medicare for all, which meant, like, we were pretty encouraged by that, because that meant that between 2016, or really 15, and 2020, the Sanders campaign had opened up discursive space. It really kind of softened the ground like a good artillery attack would do, or people trying to organize around a political agenda that centered the interests of working people, like of all colors. All right, so then the pandemic hits, and I certainly don't believe any conspiratorial nonsense about the pandemic, but the pandemic is a pandemic. It hit, and then those murders, those police murders, provided the opportunity for the neoliberals and the corporate elites to jump out in front of it. But in fact, I'm sure a lot of your audience saw that classic photo of Schumer and Pelosi and a bunch of others with the kente cloth stoles on, kneeling like they were about to start a Kappa step show. Right.
But my favorite, I'm sorry, is still Jamie Dimon taking a knee in front of his vaults.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's right. No, that's
literally in front of his vaults. And I'm sitting there and I keep saying, open them joints up, and then maybe the knee will have meant something. But I just was like, this is crazy. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Well, no, I mean, that's exactly the point. And I agree. That one is the best. But so, like a couple of years ago, good friend, longtime comrade, grad school mate, and colleague, recently retired Professor Willie Leggett at South Carolina State, called me one day because he had just been looking at V.O. Key's classic book, Southern Politics and State and Nation, a 1949 study. And he had read Key's section on the work that race did in South Carolina for the white Democrats in 1949. And he said, you know, like with only changing a few words here and there, we can say the same thing about what race is doing in South Carolina and elsewhere now, but not just for the racist segregationists, but also for the black and white Democrats, right? Because race, abstract references to race and racism, which are both abstractions, right, have a way of changing the conversation, right? I just did a column in the New Republic, reflecting back on this being the 75th anniversary of the publication of St. Clair Drake and Horace Caton's classic Black Metropolis, and that also reminded me that in like a really overstuffed reading course that I did, one of my last two grad courses at Penn on Black American political thought over the course of the 20th century. The student who was first year student then, who was leading the discussion around a week of readings that was a whole bunch of stuff from the mid-30s and the mid-40s, like debates in the Journal of Negro Education about the New Deal, big sections of Rayford Logan's What the Negro Wants, stuff by Ralph Bunche and Randolph and a bunch of other people. And she said quite ingenuously that the thing that struck her was that in nothing that she read was anybody talking about the need to fight racism. But what they were talking about was specific policies that they were for, and specific policies that they were against, and specific social forces that they were moving against. And that's what, the historic mass movement that took shape between the mid-30s and the mid-40s, that won most of what Black Americans in my generation, my parents' generation, my son's generation, had come to depend on as rights and benefits of being a member of the society. All those were won not out of a retreatist struggle against an abstraction called racism, but as elements of a broader struggle for winning social justice. And as people like Randolph and ironically everybody who contributed to the What the Negro Wants volume, which was supposed to be radicals, moderates, and conservatives, that everybody said, in addition to saying that segregation had to go, of course, but what everybody else said, some more reluctantly than others, was that the prospect for continued advances for Black Americans after World War II depended on continued expansion of the social state, right, of the social wage policy, right, and a continued growth of industrial unionism, right, because the understanding was that the best way to win and secure benefits for Black people is to win and secure them for everybody. Right. But that's something else that's kind of lost. And I think part of that, I'll shut up in a second because I feel like I'm ranting, but a part of that, comes with a mea culpa, right, of my generation of Black power radicals who were naively, again, prepared to accept mystifications about, the Black community. And that caused us problems. I can recall to this day, trying to make judgments, right, about and criticisms of the emerging Black political class after the Voting Rights Act, right, and what they did and what we should be able to expect from them. And because we weren't able to do that, right, because we weren't able to posit criteria for evaluating the performance and the actions of Black people who purport to speak in the name of the entire Black population, we weren't able to respond to them in a critical way. And look, the deck was stacked against us, because once they started to hold these offices, I mean, they had resources, and nothing builds a constituency as well as resources, right? So I mean, they could do that, but then you also start to see around the edges. Well, I mean, the thing we were talking about at the very beginning, well, you know, I take this $14 million. Floyd McKissick, take the $14 million from the Nixon administration to build Soul City, which never got built, by the way. But that doesn't mean that I'm selling out. That just means that I'm, you know, taking stuff that's there. So anyway, and it's been kind of downhill since then. But then you start to stir in, like, the further and further removed that our politics, black politics, has evolved from connection to real popular constituencies that people have to justify themselves before, the more the effective constituency is what it was when Booker T. Washington became the first person recognized as a Negro leader. And that constituency is the powerful, parens, white, closed parens, corporate and philanthropic elites, right, and funders, who, you know, to whom one ultimately has to show accountability. And then young people come up and, you know, kind of sloppy when scholarship. I'm not going to mention any names here until you make me, right, later, perhaps. But you know, about what the movement was, what Black Power was, that you know, sort of conflate fashion statements and material on leaflets and pronouncements from actual organizing. Then people forget, don't ever learn, right? I mean, don't ever make the connection that a movement has to be built on a concrete foundation. And I'll conclude this rant with saying that the thing that really first gave me real pause about Black Lives Matter in particular, well, in addition to the fact that I could never understand how somebody can claim ownership for having started a movement. That just doesn't, to me, that just flies in the face of what a movement is. But and I still don't understand how a hashtag is a movement. But I guess that's because I'm just old and don't understand the ways of the youth. But when I saw a panel with her, and maybe Colors and Tometi too, I can't remember, but the way that Garza was talking on this panel made absolutely clear that she didn't make, and it seemed like couldn't make, but I don't know, I never had it in class, a distinction between advancing the particular brand that the three of them had crafted around the hashtag and advancing the movement as totally indistinguishable, right? In fact, it doesn't even give what I took of her narrative. That doesn't even do it justice to suggest that indistinguishability was even an idea that applied, because it was like a unity of identity. It was the same thing for them. And of course, look, I mean, that totally works for the other side. And now it's bearing fruit.
So I appreciate you laying all that out. I just struggled that it just raises so many questions. All right. So at least on the one hand, if I hear what I'm hearing, that there's at least two separate things happening. There is first your class first analysis.
Well, I would say it's class first.
Okay. In the dynamic of race class, it is class first. Well, forgive the oversimplification. Go ahead. Okay, let me forgive me. No. As I'm seeing it, in my simple way of trying to get it. There's that, or whatever is first. You have your preferred view of what is best for organizing to change the world to make it better. There's that.
Right.
And then there is the poorly carried out effort of those who would agree with the formation of Black Lives Matter, or what was attempted, or what is being attempted now. In other words, if I, again, going back to my simplistic separation here, if it in my mind, it would be theoretically possible to have done a better job of organizing Black Lives Matter from the beginning, even on the basis of a race first analysis, or something that is identitarian, as I think was the word that you used, right? So, okay, I was thinking I'll just mute you for a second, just so I can get at least the question part done. Because even for those of us who would struggle with your, and I don't know to what extent I do exactly, but I feel like I struggle with your initial framing in the paragraph that I read from the previous piece.
Okay.
But my point is that on the one hand, there are people. So is it possible that the improved, or the improved version of organizing that took place in the 20s and 30s that you were talking about, couldn't that have included, or couldn't some argue that included a higher level of race conscious and solidarity, that even a slogan like Black Lives Matter could slowly start to get people pushed back towards? Because initially, when they first, so like, I've never supported Black Lives Matter in any meaningful way, for a lot of the reasons you've raised, for a lot of the reasons Dhoruba bin Wahad has raised. BLM is Black Liberation Movement, not Black Lives Matter. The whole, right. And from the beginning, in my minimum effort to try to engage the three founding sisters, it was from the one or two times we ever crossed paths. My only point was initially, could you please have more conversations with all varieties of the Black left?
Right.
Because a lot of these issues that you're raising had been brought from the beginning, and we from the beginning saw men in particular taking credit for Black Lives Matter and doing a lot of scandalous, spurious things with it, the blue vest dude included, and all of that, right? So I was saying to them, if you better organize your, beyond the slogan, your politics, your ideology, you get all of that clear and make sure everybody understands who you three are and what you want, right, it will avert some of those kinds of scandalous types of things. And they seem to not really want to do that. And that was the only real.
Right.
So I said it to say, and I want to make this point real quick before I forget, because this is, to me, it's kind of funny. I do have a Google alert on my name, which only over the last several months has blown up in a different way because of an interview I did with Patrisse Cullors in 2015. Okay. Where the point of which behind the scenes was to have this conversation that she and others didn't really want to have, but she was gracious enough to grant that short interview. And during it, I asked her about ideology, and her response included the phrase, "We are, quote, trained Marxists," which is why the right has picked it up and has dragged her all through the mud. Right. And because my name is associated with the interview, that's why I've been seeing. So I'm saying that the paradox here is that not being willing, I think, to be clear enough from the beginning, not organizing beyond the brand, right, has left the door open for a lot of this to occur, right, including the critique that you raise, those that I've raised, and then on the worst end of the poorly organized, because we're not going to claim I'm not, at least, and I agree with you about corruption. On the worst end of the organizing side, it leads to 10 chapters around the country and into Canada saying, we can't be a part of it. We need to call you out now. Right.
Well, I'm going to say a couple things. My first thought was when you mentioned that, the question that you put to the sisters, right? I was thinking, well, see, but like you were saying to a leopard, but you really ought to be a giraffe. Right. And I appreciate that. I've done enough of that in my life too, right? And then, after a couple of the responses, like the kind of response that you report, you just, if you have some wits about you, you just say to yourself, well, I guess it really is a leopard, right? But so, I mean, that's one thing. Second thought is that, this latest furor, right? Though I think I had you on this email thread when I asked, like, does anybody remember Tony?
Yeah.
my first thought, even before that, was that this is exactly what happened with DeRay McKesson, right? And that's another problem with that kind of thing. Like, you jump out and grab the microphone, and if you put the microphone down for a minute, or if there's another microphone out there, then somebody else sees that this is the shortcut way to get someplace. And I still think, and this may sound screwed up in some way, but one of the other things that struck me about all of the BLM activists and the penumbra, right, that I've seen on TV, is that they're all mediagenic, right? They all self-present like they're just waiting to be called up from Syracuse to the commentator's desk at MSNBC, right? I read it from the Developmental League, you know what I'm saying?
That's it.
Right? And the third thing is, on that same vein, actually, is, like my good friend and former doctor, Quentin Young, once I saw him giving a talk at the NYU Med School. This was back about 03 or 04, because I was still in New York, and he was 80 then, and he was talking to a group of med students, and one woman said, really quite dolefully, that she couldn't imagine. And Quentin, by the way, was one of the founders of Physicians for the National Health Program, so that's one of the single payer organizations, and that's what he was talking about. And she said, I appreciate what you're saying, but I can't imagine being able to make any headway on this, because the right wing has been in power and set the agenda for all of my conscious life. And Quentin said to her, well, that there are a lot of ways of getting old as a pain in the ass, but one of the useful things about it is that you can recognize how quickly things can change. And she said, nobody, not even the most earnest civil rights activist or the most wild-eyed communist standing in 1950 would have imagined that the back of the Jim Crow order was going to be broken within 15 years, and stuff changes. Well, my version of that in this context is that BLM seems to be in this domain anyway, a rehearsal of the genesis of Black Power, right? In one particular sense, that Black Power was born as a slogan. And I was 19 when Stokely started chanting, along with the Reverend Willie Ricks, on the Emeritus March in 1966, Black Power, and it swept over me like it swept over a substantial percentage of Black college-age people, especially men, right, in my cohort. But it didn't have any content, right? And the struggle over the next couple of years was largely over defining what Black Power meant. And it was a struggle that was asymmetrical with respect to social and class power, right? In the sense that those who had the most of the latter were going to be more successful in defining the former. And I think BLM has the same features about it, right? Like, it doesn't have content, or it didn't have content. So then people started rushing to try to give it content with the platforms and the programs or whatever. And it's a similar thing with, like, the defund the police slogan. Like, if you've got a slogan that you have to explain, then it's not a good slogan. Okay. But so there's an incoherence there, I think. But
if I can just interrupt you just briefly
sure.
for a second, because I don't want to lose sight of this, because April here is as far as I know, who is one of the leaders of the DC chapter, and she can correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. And this is the concern, and I've actually, April, I'm glad. I've actually tried to reach you through mutual to invite you on or to talk. I'd like to hear more from you directly and others. But she's raising, if I caught the comment in the right timing, mm-hmm. the very question that I'm concerned about and have been from the beginning, that there, because I'm much more, though I don't think April and I have met. I'm much more familiar with. I'm just going to mute you for a quick second while that's ringing. I'm much more familiar with the grassroots Black DC community of organizers, and just from working from that base to a certain extent over the last couple of decades, I've met a lot of people who I think are righteous and trying to do good work, whose good work is subsumed beneath more popular versions of what everybody's claiming to be doing. So from the beginning with Black Lives Matter, my concern was, and to your point, you know, it was maybe naive, or maybe it was just so I could say that I did it and could say that I made the attempt before saying anything else elsewhere. But the point was to say, listen, if you're not more clear, if you're not, I think, even a little more aggressive in identifying who is what and who is who and why, and if we don't go, and, you know, and I've been on the record for years saying I've never been in agreement with the so-called leaderful movement organization. I don't believe, you know, there needs to be some sort of structure and accountable and all of this other kind of thing. So my whole point was, without that, it leads to the point where people get on TV, people get more popular views and subscriptions and all of this and money to represent what, as you said, for what everybody, you know, the whole group. And meanwhile, there are people on the ground trying to, and this is my whole reaction to when I see the statement that the DC chapter has signed on to. What I'm seeing is, and I've been hearing this from people all around the country for years, saying, you know, off the record, I don't know what's really going on. There's some problems here. And anyway, so I've been trying to, so my point is, no, from my point of view, April, not all of you, and not everybody in Black Lives Matter or who works in some variation under that hashtag. But this is the point, that it's that without the organized clarity the clarity that comes from organization, people are allowed to speak for people who aren't.
Right.
Anyway, so that for me, April, is a poor attempt at summarizing where I'm coming from with my critique of all of this, and why I wanted to talk with Professor Reed and really several others who I've reached out to already. But, you know, I mean, it is what it is. We're all busy, and I'm it's just this one platform. So it is. But anyway, so Professor Reed, please continue. But I wanted to catch that comment while she put it up.
Oh yeah, no. Well,
I, you know, appreciate that too.
I just wanted to say, I mean, and I agree with your take on it, right? I'm not, but see, this isn't even a way we should think about politics anyway, right?
Okay.
But I mean, the question that, well, but are you saying that every individual who's associated with this tendency has these problems? And no, of course not. I wouldn't say that about the labor movement. I wouldn't say it about the NAACP. I wouldn't say it about, you know, the Workers' Party in Brazil, right? Or about anything else. So no, I mean, but that's not even the point, right? I mean, that's not even the point, right? The point is what the social force of the movement is, right? And what public perceptions are. And I thought it was also very striking, right, that not just the MSNBC crowd, who are, you know, wholly owned subsidiaries of the Democratic Party and the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, no matter what color they come in, or gender they come in, or sexual orientation they come in, right? I mean, that's what they are. I mean, it kind of reminds me when Thurgood Marshall was interviewed when around the time that Clarence Thomas's name had come up as a nominee, and somebody asked him about Thomas as a replacement for him, and Marshall's response was, you know, my daddy taught me that if you see a black snake and a white snake coming down toward you on the road, you kill the snake, right? So I mean, that's not it. Really.
Yeah.
But I mean, people look. So we all, right, get drawn into activism or movement life or whatever. Like, I don't think that, frankly, that I've ever referred to myself as an activist across the board. And I've asked my son about this. He never heard it. And people I go back to college with said that they don't recall having heard me say it. But we all get drawn to stuff. We all become part of alliances that go bad, or that weren't what they looked like they were. I mean, that's just the nature of human life, right? We believe things that used to seem to make sense, but that don't anymore, right? So from my perspective, the problem isn't, and see, I think this is I think the notion that usurpationist behavior by, as my son used to call him, Stingray McGillicuddy, or Garza and Colors et al. Isn't the problem. It's an expression of the problem, right? Because you shouldn't have, if you have a movement, right, that's rooted and grounded in its organizational structures, then it's much less likely that individuals will be tempted. And again, I'm not really trying to impute concupiscence, right, to any one of them, right, or to anybody, right? It's just that people respond to the structures that they find themselves in, and the layers of structures, which includes opportunity structures. And Lord knows, I mean, every one of us, has to understand that the easiest thing in the world to sell yourself, and especially after 45 years of neoliberal dominance inside Black politics as well as outside, the easiest thing to sell yourself on is that what you're doing, what advances yourself personally, is for the good of some broader population, like the race. I taught at Yale during the years that Obama was at Columbia and at Harvard, right? And I was quite struck by this, how earnestly many of the Black Yaleys were absolutely convinced that their being at an Ivy League institution had been the goal of the civil rights movement. And that every step that they took up the rung of social mobility was not just a victory for them, but a victory for all of us, right? Just because they were convinced of that doesn't mean it was true, obviously, and also doesn't necessarily mean that they were bad people, though many of them grew into being bad people as they became adults, and that's like the natural trajectory of that kind of mindset. But it's also very easy as an adolescent, like especially, if you can imagine, like there were still probably a handful of students of color around there then who came from, if not poor, at least working class or lower middle class communities and families. There's probably a higher percentage of them among the Puerto Rican students than among the Black American students. But then the Ivy League took care of all that, and they turned all the Black American students into the children of West Indian and African immigrants. But well, not all of them, but a lot of them. But so imagine what that experience is like, because I've seen it happen, like in some cases too. Like you've been imbued with this education is the way out, success, be a credit to your people line your whole life. You get the fat letter of admission to one of those joints, and then like everybody in your family is both praising you and showering you with great expectations. The church might even do it, right? They might call you out, right? Right. Before the congregation. So it's hard for a young person not to absorb that ideology. I had one student literally say to me when I asked her, like in a seminar about this, I said to her kind of quizzically, well, it sounds like what you're saying is the whole point of the civil rights movement was that you could go to Yale and then go to work at Morgan Stanley. And she said yes, and kind of emphatically. And I said, well, and without thinking, I said, I wish somebody had told Sammy Young Jr. and Viola Liuzzo that that's what that stuff was all about, because they might have lived longer.
Well, but by the way, that view is also supported by routine, as they would call it, a message force multiplication on commercial media,
Right.
Where
That's right.
people like Al Sharpton, I saw not too long ago, literally sat at some special interview with him and said in some plush downtown Manhattan cigar bar,
Mhm.
maybe 2 years ago, and he said literally the same thing. The point of the struggle was so that I could sit here and have this cigar.
Well, I'll give you a more poignant version of it. For a couple of years in the mid '80s, why am I blocking on his name? David Hilliard from the Panthers lived in New Haven, and he was, kind of on his uppers then. It was just before his book came out, right? His memoir came out, and I got him a couple of gigs talking to classes, and in one of them, in response to a question, he said, "Well, like we look at what happened with these guys like Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman and the rest, and like Rubin went on to be a successful stockbroker before I guess his habits got him. But what David said was, and we wanted the same thing that everybody wanted. Like we wanted those Cadillacs and those houses and those big jobs. Now I'm sure
that's not true.
That's not what he was thinking, like in 1967, 8, and 9, right? But by the mid '80s, right, this ideology had become so hegemonic, right, that people were reading it back into the course of their own involvements in the movement, right? And now it's like common sense, because that's what neoliberal hegemony means, right? So when Barack Obama and his whole crew routinely expressed contempt in practical terms for people who went to public schools and were so willing to throw all their might behind people who were out to destroy public schools. They had a nice story they could tell themselves, which was, teachers unions, ossified problems, this, that, and the other. And every child needs to have the opportunity to go as far as his or her latent ability can take them, blah, 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 blah. Oh, but, and I don't know what the version of that was about privatizing the postal service, but, so like there, you've got a black political class, or really it's not even a black political class at this point. It's a black component of a ruling class, right? Leading the charge against two of the pivotal institutions that have been the backbone of creation of a stable black middle class for the last more than the last half century. Because on that note, I'll share this anecdote. When I took my PhD qualifying exams, we had like 4 8-hour written exams over 8 days. And when I walked out of the last one, and we had an option to, if you fail one, you could appeal to take that one again. If you failed more than one, you had to take all 4 again. And I said to a buddy of mine, well, I tell you what, if I failed anything, I'm done, and I'm just going straight down to the post office to take the civil service exam. I was only part joking in 1975. The joke would not have made any sense whatsoever by 1985, and certainly none now. And black politics, and see, this I guess kind of takes me back to my rejection of the class first character, or my non-acceptance, right, of the class first characterization. That everything about race and politics in this country, not just at this point, is embedded in dynamics of capitalist reproduction, right? The fact that we are black people is ultimately a product of the dynamics of capitalist reproduction, right? And one of the things I don't like about what my son, I think, properly has sort of flipped to call race reductionist politics is that it presumes that there's some racial dynamic that occurs entirely outside the logic of capitalist reproduction, and it just isn't, right? So one more anecdote, okay? In 1998, I just moved back to Connecticut from Chicago, and I had to fly back out to Chicago for a program. And I was sitting in the Hartford airport, and this sister comes in who looks kind of familiar. And at that point, I'd been flying a lot with Labor Party stuff. So I thought, and I'd come to recognize flight crews. So I thought she might have been a flight attendant on some of the flight I'd been on. Well, it turns out it was Gayle King. Mm. And one of the reasons I realized it was Gayle King, because there was an adoring throng of 25 to 45-year-old white lady fans who were fawning all over her. And I thought it was kind of interesting to see how Gayle had managed to pull off the simultaneous performance of a superficial intimacy with her fans while maintaining the regal distance. All right. So, I mean, that was kind of anthropologically curious. But so we got on the plane, and she points out to the lady sitting behind me, because she was across the aisle. The first thing she pointed out to her was that, this was an on the spur of the moment trip. So that's why she wasn't in first class, but was back there in steerage with the rest of us, basically. But the reason for the spur of the moment trip, and this is what got me, was that she explained sotto voce to her confidants, right? That was the weekend that Blessed was opening in Chicago, and she was going out. She'd seen it before, of course, but she was going out to be counted as part of the box office. And then she said to the throng, you know, it's really important that we all go see this film on the opening weekend to boost the box office. And it was like, a racial thing, right, as well as an Oprah fan thing. So I'm sitting there thinking, wow, okay, so I didn't realize I had an obligation to go out and make more money for somebody who's got so much money that God goes to her to get a title loan, right? But it was like that whole thing about how we were supposed to be, outraged about her not being able to buy that $38,000 handbag, when, as Touré pointed out, was that $38,000 was only $2,000 or $3,000 less than the median income of Black American households, right? Mm-hmm. Now, right? I've been sending you this stuff too in connection with this talk,
right?
But like almost, every day, like there's some other rich Black person we're supposed to get happy about, right? Mm-hmm. And that just shows to me the fundamental inadequacy of a race reductionist understanding of inequality and injustice. And it also shows how badly we as progressives have lost the battle for hearts and minds, not just in the society at large, but within the Black American community. I don't give a goddamn, like I've said this a lot, and I don't mean this like she's a whipping person, but I don't give a goddamn if Ava DuVernay never wins another Oscar. That's not right. That's like the Chris Rock thing about going to the mailbox every day for 3 weeks looking for his OJ prize, right?
Right.
But that's what there is for us to expect out of politics, right? Because neither the Democrats nor the Republicans, no matter what color either one of them is, wants to offer or will offer us anything as working people, which then takes me back to the inroads that Sanders made between 2015 and 2020. And it's not just Sanders, right? It's Sanders' distinctive ability and placement, right? At that historical moment, to get this stuff out within the general public, so that people started to think about it on their own.
So hold on a second, because I don't want to, again, forgive me, but I don't want to lose this question and this thread.
Well, this is a conversation, man. I feel like I'm
anyway. I appreciate that. It's cool. But also because I know, because I'm about to, I know I'm about to disagree with you on the Bernie Sanders questions. Okay. So I don't want to lose track of this.
Okay.
Because I have it, and I hope you continue to add me on these emails, because I've enjoyed what I think you've been calling your race and class file.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But out of that, I have a question, because and again, I appreciate the clarification, because I admit that as someone who is who has tried to study Marxism, who appreciates Marxist logic, who tries to apply it. I am not, I'm very much, I don't know, wedded to, involved in, preferring still some sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, race first analysis. It's just, and I don't, but as I often argue, race first, but not last, to try to avoid this reductionism argument that I think you rightly point out.
Right.
So I admit some sensitivity or defensiveness around some of when I read your critique or hear your critique, for a number of reasons. One of which is that I don't want to have it be confused for those who are, again, for this purposes of oversimplification,
right,
who are in the so-called race first camp, or are nationalists, or varieties of Pan-Africanists and nationalists, or whatever.
right.
That within those groups and camps are people who are not trying to be reductionist, who are not assuming that is what's good for me is good for the group, who do have a material element to their arguments, or policy element to their arguments, etc., or just simply not hustlers.
Right.
So on some level, I would like to think that, and maybe I'm wrong here, and that's another argument or discussion, but that within that there is a lot of value for political organization, particularly if it can be done to sort of either weed out the corrupt or set up protective measures against all of our tendencies towards mistakes.
Right.
So that's one thing. So in that said, in terms of this race as class file that you I think should keep again including me on, my question is, and I even wrote it down, isn't the class of those who are well-funded and placed to say things along the lines like identity politics is bad, identity politics are reductionist, isn't that also a class, in the sense that you're describing race has become a class? If I understand.
Yeah, I hear the question. Well, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how to respond, but let me say this first, though, right? That segment of the population that you mentioned initially, right? That's who I've been trying to talk to for like 50 years, right? Right? You know what I mean? I mean that, right? I mean that's who I'm talking to, right? I mean that's why I'm here today, right? Right? Like I said, I came into the movement, the Black Power era, and was, connected with Owusu Sadaki and Howard Fuller and that crew, and I mean the New Communist movement in the mid '70s, right, close to Black Workers Congress and October League and that group, and was also and like I don't mean to try to establish my personal bona fides here, but I'm just saying that that's to the extent that one of the things that we're doing here is a struggle for the hearts and minds, right, of the people, right? One of the things, and this is one of the reasons I write the stuff I write, I do podcasts and stuff like this, and it's kind of gratifying to get responses from random people I don't know, that I think that among Black Americans, as well as among other people who are vaguely identified or want a progressive politics and want progressive change, right, along lines that I'm assuming almost everyone in your audience, except maybe the handful of people who lost their Vatican when Rikers Island was torn down, because I thought that was where the Black Hebrew Israelites had their seminary.
Wow.
Huh?
I said, oh, wow.
but apart from that, I think we all want to see the world made better in pretty much the same ways. I don't care so much about entrepreneurism, right? Because the vast majority of Black people are going to work for a living. And I think one of the most destructive things that's happened within popular black politics is this wedding of prosperity gospel, which partly sold the subprime mortgage hustle to us, is partly rationalizing gig work like it's entrepreneurialism, right? And it speaks to I mean, one of my favorite passages in Marx is that really poignant critique of what religion is that he makes, and he points out that it's like the hope of the hopeless, right? And we all have some version of that. Dope fiends have it, right? Everybody has it, right? But apart from that small or those segments, right? What I'm always trying to connect with is people who aren't necessarily looking, but who are in a material position, right, where their objective position would make them critical of capitalism and capitalist structures, no matter what colors they come in, and encourage people either to say out loud what they've been feeling, but were too intimidated to express, right, because of the dominant ideology or the dominant ideological tendencies in what passes for a movement, or to hadn't been able quite to pull the critique together, right? And for me, I mean, the first layer of that audience is Black people, right? I mean, it's no accident that I have had one op-ed piece in the New York Times in my whole life, and it was when when the editor contacted me and asked me to write, and was disappointed with because it wasn't fiery enough for him, right? It was after Tim Scott was appointed to the Senate seat, and the thrust of my column was it didn't mean anything, right? But I've never been prepared, like to make gestures even that you're supposed to be able to make, right? I mean, or that you have to make, basically, to be legitimate or respectable in that particular way in politics. I mean, I recall once in the Khalid Muhammad moment when the Times, or when reporters asked Rangel about him, and Charlie said, "Look, I'm tired of being asked to denounce people I don't even know," right? I mean, right? But go ask Schumer about David Duke or some shit, right? I mean,
right.
So I mean, there's that, and frankly, like my son, and I appreciate it greatly, is kind of protective of me, or kind of kind of protective of me, because he knows what my political history is, right? And other people do too, and it's not, I don't want to tout it because in the first place it doesn't have anything to do with anything, right? Like, it doesn't have anything to do with the truth content of what comes out of your mouth, for instance. But that said, and I mean, that's why I kind of I mean, don't get me wrong. Look, I didn't have an emotional reaction to when you made the class first. I'm reference, it's common enough, but I've gotten to the point where I just sort of dig in against it as a shorthand, because again, I'm not class first. I'm capitalism first, right? And I'm capitalism first because that's the cultural order that every one of us is embedded in, and understanding its tensions, contradictions, and dynamics is a necessary path to understanding how we got here, who we are, what the story's all about, what oppression's all about, what exploitation's all about, and people who, and in my book, and yeah, granted, I'll be honest, I'm like an old school red about this, but in my book, on that level, there's only two kinds of people in the world. there are those who recognize capitalist forces and are opposed to them, and those who accept them as nature. And if you accept them as nature, and of course we're all encouraged, especially over the last 45 years, to accept them as nature. And I'm going to send you, because I think this came out, this may have come out, I mean, after the last time you and I talked, but I did an article in a labor studies journal that grew out of a panel at the Urban Affairs Association conference in Miami that Cedric Johnson and a couple other people were on too. And it was like, it built on my old Black Urban New Regimes article, and is an account of the evolution of black politics since then. So I think you'll find it interesting. But.
No, please do send it. And again, I appreciate this clarification. And certainly in this case, as it relates to you, I in no way did I mean the class first as a pejorative. I was just trying to quickly run to some polls that I think do need some clarification. Yeah, and including my own description, my own self-description needs work too. But I appreciate the clarification, what you were saying. And again, for me, it doesn't either way. It's because, look, again, honestly, you talk about something to extend something along the lines of faith. Frankly, 20 whatever some years ago, when James Turner said you were on the list of people we need to be reading.
Yeah.
I was like, that's, it doesn't, whether I understand everything, agree with everything with you or others, it doesn't matter. I got to try to grapple with it just because, if for no other reason, he said so. And I still think that's correct.
He said so, actually.
Yeah. I mean, he in his own, I'm paraphrasing, and he's much cooler than I am and much more smooth with his delivery, but the point was clear. This is important work. We need to be thinking about what this guy is saying. And the other reason why, the other reason, frankly, I've always been drawn to those associated with Marxist politics is because they seem, and I don't know what the exact numbers are on this, but they seem to be the most aggressive in combating existing structures.
Actually,
so go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. But then I have one more question about the Sanders point, and then I want to see if we can get to some of the questions in the chat before I'm sure we're gonna have to wrap up at some point here.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Good. Well, I just wanted to make this point because you put it in my head. So, among the other characteristics of this moment that we're in now, this long moment, is that everybody alive in America today was raised with the premise that assertive Black politics is a progressive politics, right? Is part of a progressive agenda, right? And it makes sense that we were all raised that way. And it makes sense, like, especially for people from my era, but even more so from my parents' era, right? Because not only did people who supported Black or left politics supported Black politics, right, or Black political aspirations, right, like the Civil Rights Movement, even a lot of Black Power. But going back to my parents' era, the only people in Americans, or the only non-Black people in American society who supported Black people's assertive political aspirations for justice and equality were leftists, right? And what that means, and Preston Smith's work, I recommend, like, to everybody, his book, The Racial Democracy in the Black Metropolis, which is a study of post-World War II housing politics in Chicago. But Preston has argued that, very forcefully, that there were two, that from the birth of a legitimate Black mass politics in the mid-30s through the 60s, there were two distinct strains of normative foundation for Black political aspiration. One is what he calls the norm of racial democracy, which is fundamentally radical enforcement of equality of opportunity, right? And that's like Black people ought to be should be, if the society is really just, then black people should be more or less 13%, like, of every social position, occupational category in it. The other is the principle of social democracy, which is basically committed to reducing the difference between the top and the bottom, right? And expansion of the welfare state, and through the 30s and 40s, and really into the 50s and 60s, like, the dominant assertive tendency in black social movement politics was a kind of popular front black leftism that presumed the two norms, right? And that worked fine when they were running parallel and even converging. But as Preston's work shows, for instance, sometimes, so I mean, nobody even noticed that there were two, basically, is the key point, right? Because we're all part of one big movement, and that's my parents' era, right? And I knew a lot, and I know a lot of those people who came out of that experience in Chicago to this day, right? And it didn't question, right? So that's where you get notions of, like, misleadership, right? That, you know, black people who sell out the popular agenda, it's not so much that they're selling out the popular agenda, it's that they're committed to a different class agenda, right? And Preston does a great job of examining instances when those two tendencies that ran so closely together bumped up, right? And especially around concrete stuff like where to put the public house, right? I mean, which is still, you know, a flashpoint. Like, when I'm down here, I'm after Katrina, right? I mean, middle-class black people went batshit crazy about the idea of putting rental housing for the same reasons the middle-class white people did, which also should encourage a little bit of rethinking about that dynamic. But so
same thing happened where I live in Howard County, Maryland.
Yeah.
Black middle class families are not thrilled to have, you know, even in Columbia, where there's supposed to be a minimum of public housing built in every community. It's even middle class black community, you know, families here that are saying, I don't want that. I don't, you know, because their argument is, we left DC or Baltimore or whatever other city to come out here and not to live around that, and we don't want to have to live around that out here, which is, and then anyway.
Well, no, but it's not indefensible either, right? I mean, not completely indefensible in the sense that, like, if you take the whole real estate value thing seriously, as where most families get whatever wealth they have, you know, people are concerned about protecting their property value.
But the problem with that part of the myth is that even where there's not poor people next to them, the fact of their blackness devalues the homes, even in a middle class neighborhood, relatively speaking. So, I mean, it's.
And I mean, that's what makes it so tragic, or what did anyway, when I paid attention, you know, this kind of thing more closely, to see those black people who kept chasing that neighborhood, not willing to face up to the fact that the minute that they got there, everybody else was going to leave. But anyway, so what's happened over the last 40 years, and this is a problem a lot of progressives have to this day, all right, is you can't just assume that because an issue appears to be a black issue, that it's consistent with a progressive politics, because it's not. I mean, necessarily, and we need to, all of us, but especially working black people, right, need to be able to make that distinction, and that's one of the lessons that one hopes would have been imbibed in a different way after more than a half century of the emergence of an electorally and administratively based black political class. What's unfortunate is the way that it's been imbibed is a more passive, and it's taken the form of political disengagement, right? Because you just don't see politics as a venue for pursuing agendas that would actually make your life better, right? But anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah, so
no, listen, because there's a number of comments or questions that I would like to see if we could address at least a little bit, if you're still okay on some time. And then so I'll just let me just I don't want to get down another rabbit hole too much, but
go to the Sanders thing.
Well, just the shortest version is that I've never agreed that he was a strong conduit for socialist or leftist ideas. I never took him seriously. Mm-hmm. I knew he was not going to be allowed to run.
Right. That's right.
I knew he would fold back and end up having everybody go support Biden. And like the late great Bruce Dixon used to say, he was a sheepdog for the Democrats. Yeah. And I want us to break away from that Democratic Party mold in how we engage electoral politics. So when you, if I heard you correctly earlier, and when others, I think, do more aggressively make the point that Sanders' presence was a net positive because he helped promote leftist and socialist ideas, I've never agreed with that. I don't think he was necessary for that, and I don't think he was a good representative of those ideas.
Okay.
And then the net is that we are back. Either many people are just disillusioned or went back to Biden, and I think that is just
right. Well, yeah, no. I mean, I hear you, and I'll be brief, right? Mm-hmm. Because I never entertained for an idea that Bernie could win the nomination, right? And I agreed to get involved in the campaign through the labor wing. Partly because I thought that this could give us a chance or space to try to build something inside the labor movement and outside, like in working class communities. And frankly, after 2016, I was hoping, I think incorrectly, that he would go away, because I thought that we'd put together enough to try to build on. Independently of him. Well, the reality is that we hadn't, right? But by the time that he ran again in 2020, just seeing the response in the primary states that he ran in, it really did open space for people like me and us to talk, to real working people with names and addresses and concerns and that kind of thing about these issues. Partly because you're not going to win Medicare for all, like in Congress anyway, but partly to start the wheels turning that can eventually turn into the mass movement that could help us fight for some of this stuff, right? And that's like a little thing. Like I've got respect for Bernie. As a person, I barely know him because it was never about that for me. It was never about the Bernie movement, right? Anything like that. So yeah, and as far as the Biden thing goes, look, man, a slogan that I propounded on somebody else's podcast that a friend of mine made a poster out of was Biden Harris 2020, because sometimes you have to clean the damn toilet, right?
Oh, was that you? Because I actually saw some. They're not attributing it properly, but I saw a version of that somewhere. I'm gonna let them know that was. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I want to cut on the T-shirt.
Okay, that's fair enough. I don't want to. I want to get to some of these comments or questions before we have to wrap up, because I don't want to. I just don't want to go. I don't know. I want to. The next time we talk, which will be much sooner than the last time, we'll talk more about where we can go with electoral politics. Let me just run through, because I'm very appreciative that we've had this many people sticking around so long.
I'll say one thing about electoral politics.
Sure, go ahead.
That's not my domain either.
Right. No, I got it.
Right.
But in terms of what a loose group of people called radicals might do to engage electoral politics, if in fact that would be something I'd be interested in talking to you about.
Yeah, we talk about that too.
So my colleague and and best buddy, Dr. Todd Burrows here, he mentions this, and I caught it earlier, but I want to come back to it because this B-span idea is, I think, important and something he came up with when I was still in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that essentially there be a black C-SPAN or something that would have these kinds of conversations all day, 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I still think we need something like that. And I still, in my own fantasy, feel like in the digital sense, I am part of a loose group of people doing that. But I think we should organize it more concretely and develop something like that. So I wanted to. Now, this other comment I saw from Brother Omawale Africa, he made this one about an hour ago, talking about, obviously the various roles people play or positions they take.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to come back to this because indirectly, this classic essay of yours, I believe that's close to the right title, right? What are the drums saying, Booker?
Yeah. That is the title.
That is the full title, right? Yeah. This indirectly helped me completely fumble a debate I had with Michael Eric Dyson that never aired, thankfully, because it was so bad.
Mm.
Because on the way to prepare for it, I reread this essay, and I think I was overhyped, and I lost track of my argument, and he was able to do his his linguistic gymnastics to anyway. So I saw that comment. I wanted to pull that out because, and if you want to say anything about it in the context of today's conversation, I think that essay, I think it was right on time then, and it continues to be.
Thank you.
Thanks to Greensboro. Thank you very much,
Veronica. Hey, Veronica, how you doing?
Okay, so good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Let's see. Talking about who does and does not do Black Power studies correctly. Yeah, no. We've earlier today, I was saying people should go get the video. We sat down with Dr. Keto Swan about his new book, where Black Power studies is done correctly, I would argue, and I would encourage people to go check that out, about Palu Comercafago and radical Black diaspora. It's a powerful book, a lot of good work in it. I'm trying to find some specific questions that I thought I saw for you. A vigorous discussion, at least, is going on. Forgive me, everybody, for not having it. Well, here's one I think is somewhat addressed already. Is there too much addiction to the spectacle of shutting down freeways with Black Lives Matter?
Right.
I've thought event planning has become too much of a problem within a whole bunch of organizing spaces.
There's a great article on that in nonsite.org by Virginia Hotchkiss, HOTCHKISS, who was a founder of a firm, or who had been a founder of a firm in DC that actually organized spectacular demonstrations for people.
Oh, wow.
Something about that strain of the movement. I would urge everybody to check it out.
I will look for that immediately. Absolutely. Where was the criticism of Arnie Duncan? Oh, there was. I mean, I know in the pages of Black Agenda Report there were plenty for one place.
Right.
Maybe I misread. There was just so much commentary. I thought there were some specific questions or something that I thought I saw. But Sanders' political imagination is severely limited by absolutely anemic understanding of white supremacy. Even Coates understood this.
I don't believe. Well, I don't know.
Go ahead.
No. Well, yeah. Look, I mean, what white supremacy is another one of those airy abstractions, just in the way that socialism is for a lot of people. And I can truthfully say I don't really know what people mean by it when they say it, and I've never gotten anything out of Coates that I wouldn't get out of a fortune cookie. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna let that answer ride
for the both of us.
Okay. I'm glad.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. For instance, I've never seen him as particularly a quote unquote problem in the way, for instance, that I've had with like Peniel Joseph or Dyson, or I don't for some reason, huh?
It's funny you mentioned that first name though.
Peniel Joseph.
Yeah. Speaking of Black Power studies.
Well, he and he's one of the few that I've felt compelled to challenge publicly. I mean, I years ago debated him on my radio show. I written an essay about his Stokely book that I thought was just, and I haven't read his latest book. I just can't do it anymore. So Yeah. This is not a plant. I appreciate Bart. No, we have not talked about my Myth of Black Buying Power book, but I think actually Professor Reed, if I heard you correctly earlier, I thought you were going somewhere on it when you mentioned entrepreneurialism. Because essentially my argument is that that's not a pathway to address capitalist inequality, but it's not necessarily the enemy, but it's not going to solve. It's not the panacea. So I think
it can become the enemy if that's what you load on all your politics onto.
Well, okay. So Benny, if I got your name right, that's our discussion. We agree. And in one line, he summarized what it took me a short book to write. That when it becomes when it becomes politics, the myth becomes something else, and that's a problem for sure. Well, look, I guess that's it. Listen, Professor Reed, again, thank you very much. These 90 minutes have been fantastic, and I promise you it will not be another 4 years before we do another one.
Great. Well, and once again, Professor Ball, thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, anytime. No, we're definitely gonna do this again sooner than later. So, thank you very much for joining us, and peace, man. Take good care. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. To everybody else, thank you for joining us. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your support. Please like, retweet, share, critique, send all of that in. And let's keep it going. We got a lot more coming up. Rosa Clemente is going to be here tomorrow afternoon, so please check that out. Sign up at the YouTube, sign up at imakeswhatilike.org, and hopefully you'll come back for that and all the other ones. Please do check out the one we did with Keto Swan earlier today, because my goodness, was that on point. Again, thanks everybody. And as Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. We'll catch you later. I mix what I like.